in gratitude to all who create music and beauty in this place. Art thou troubled, music will calm thee. Art thou weary, rest shall be thine. Troubled and weary, we all know those times in our lives, and if we are lucky, music will be there to soothe our weary spirit, and we will be blessed with a kind of rest which restores our soul. And there are stories too. What are the stories we know which help us get through those troubled and weary times? And in thinking about the theme of Revelation, what are the stories we do not know? What are the stories we grew up with? What are the stories that other people grew up with, which we know parts of? In the Jewish tradition, the first full day of Passover was yesterday, April 4th. Members and friends of our congregation gathered in Fellowship Hall last evening to partake in the Jewish festival ritual feast known as the Passover Seder. The Seder involves the retelling, every year, the retelling of the Israelite Exodus, a story of slavery to freedom. The retelling of the story every year is important as a part of the Jewish tradition, of the custom of Seder, as is the partaking of symbolic foods, eating matzah, drinking wine, remembering the oppressive times as well as the times of liberation. And the Seder is celebrated by Jews and their family and friends throughout the world. And from this Jewish tradition, several millennia ago, came a man named Jesus of Nazareth, who was born, lived, and died a Jew. Many stories developed around his life, stories of his birth, teachings, healings, suffering, death, and resurrection. As Unitarian Universalists, we draw from many sources for our spiritual inspiration, including the wisdom of the world religions. And in this time we are in, where we go from winter into spring, these narratives of slavery into freedom, death into resurrection, are the stories we tap into, we lean into. Some of them for us are stories we do not know. We might make discoveries if we allow ourselves to go into them deeper. This past week, I attended the Holy Week gatherings of the Bloomington Inclusive Mass Community, or as I like to call them, the free-range Catholics. Partly to support my colleague, Father Daniel Kostakis. He is one of the most earnest religious leaders I know right now. He's an inspiration to me. But mainly to discover the things I did not and do not know about the Christian tradition of Holy Week. To allow myself, as Rebecca Parker did say, to be radically hospitable to the things I do not know. And I find a great way to enter the unknown is to participate in ritual. On Thursday, I attended the Maundy Thursday worship with its service of foot washing, then later the stripping of the altar, and then Tenebrae, the worship of shadows in which the room is darkened and the congregation encounters Jesus' final days from the upper room to the Mount of Olives. And then through the various shadows we all encounter life, we went through the shadows of denial, sorrow, betrayal, desertion, trials and tribulations, and the shadow of death. It is a sobering service as candles are extinguished with each named shadow, and the silence provides time to recall the weariness in our own lives, the winter of our discontent, if you will, so that we might enter the unknown mystery of life and death, so we might encase ourselves with the daffodil bulb, preparing to emerge from the rich, dark earth where music calms us, where we rest and prepare to come forth. And now Reverend Watkins will explain resurrection.
I'll get you, Marianne. Although I kind of will in a way, but not really. Not surprisingly, resurrection is a bit of a stretch for many of us as Unitarian Universalists. And also, not surprisingly, Easter is about resurrection. The core story of it tells the tale of Jesus 3 days after he died, awakening from that eternal sleep and moving forward in his ministry. We are not alone in our consternation about the theme of resurrection, however, and I guess that is good news. In 2010, the Barna Research Group did research about what people actually believed, and out of a large sampling of born-again fundamentalist Christians, 30% of them did not believe that Jesus came back to physical life after he was crucified. And if you broaden it out amongst Christians in the United States, every study shows that over half of them don't believe it literally either. So why do we keep telling this story? Well, we didn't originate the idea, to say the least. It goes way back. And there are characters from many different times and many different cultures that speak to us the themes of rebirth. We have Alian Baal, who is a god of fertility and thunderstorms, who finds himself overcome and dead and is only brought to life by the resurrecting power of a goddess. We have King Osiris, who is killed, and this time out of jealousy, by his brother Seth, kind of a nice natural name, and for good measure, his brother dismembers him. And once again, it takes a woman to rescue the world. Isis comes forward, mourning his death, and just as all people do, reassembling him and bringing him back to life. And we have in Korean mythology, Bari, who crossed treacherous mountains, forded flesh-dissolving waters. Where was she? And accessing impenetrable thorn fortresses, using the mighty power, I'm not making this up, of her compassion, her goodness, and some flowers. And at the end, crosses a magical rainbow bridge. All of this, not for her own life, but to save the life of her parents. And at the end of the story, after doing all of that and doing it so sweetly, she gets home and they have already died. But when she offers the good gifts of her journey, that offering brings them back to life. Bishop Spong, who made a wonderful ministry of liberating Christianity from its overburdened, hate-filled possibilities, reminded us that so many powerful stories are at their core myth. Not myth in terms of something that is not true, but myth in terms of these stories are about something deeper than whether they are factual, or for that matter, what scientifically or rationally happened. Myth is about answering deeper questions about human existence. The questions that don't have column A or column B kinds of answers, that test us mightily. And resurrection stories have stayed alive because we need them. We all need them. We, Unitarian Universalists, need resurrection. Because the truth is, at some point in our life, if not many times in our life, we will have some sort of experience that takes us to the very brink of what we can tolerate and stand, to the very edge of a cliff of despair and being overwhelmed. And in that moment, death will not seem like a metaphor to us. It may be those moments where our health or the health of someone we love is clearly bringing them to the brink of death, if not, obviously moving towards death. It may be that time in your life, after months into years, you have been unemployed, and not only do you worry about how to pay your bills and keep your family healthy, but you begin to wonder what your worth is without employment. It may be when some deeply cherished ideal is suddenly blown aside and you know the world in a shockingly different way. In those moments, we really do feel like we have died. And while it is true that we will find resilience within those moments, and so for the last month we have explored the various pathways to build up that resilience in moments of difficulty. That is true. But what is also true is there will inevitably a moment where our resilience wears thin. And in that moment of greatest vulnerability, almost without exception, mythology and truth together tells us that we will be offered the ability to see our world differently, powerfully. That moment will be to us a revelation. And if we can keep ourselves open and humble, if we can access the humility to let that truth sink in deeply, it does transform us, not in some sweet, delightful, rosy way, but in a way that cracks us open and makes us new. If we can survive that and give ourselves to it, how we move forward in our lives is a resurrection. To have faced our deepest fears, our darkest nights, and to have found within us enough calm to just let deeper truths, the strengths that we have inside that we didn't know we possessed, the love that is able to survive even death, the way that we can take our own wounds and turn them into inspiration for a real compassion for other people who are wounded. Those moments will resurrect our life if we can give ourselves to them. And so we need those stories that remind us that there is always more. We need the stories that say to us what we think of as limits. Well, they just are not so. Because our life is connected to a larger life, a larger story. And even when we take our last breath, what we have done will live on beyond our life. So we need to be reminded in stories that are both personal and fantastic. We need to remember what the resurrection really tells us, that there is always more possibility. In the larger life, there is always more hope. The power of Easter is that it connects us with stories that speak to us of a life that is stronger than every form of death. And it reminds us, if we will soften ourselves as the earth is softened by winter, ultimately, that life is ours for the taking. May that be some of the story that you take with you on this Easter. May it speak its truth and give you life. So may it be.
So last night, Doug and I attended the vigil with the Bloomington Inclusive Mass and somehow ended up being the drummers. And Father Daniel asked us to there's a part where you're in darkness and the drums take you in a very slow beat to the resurrection, and they light candles, and they told us about this. So we started, and then we picked up speed, and then we peaked, and those guys light a lot of candles. So
Not even close to done yet.
and we were like this, and we just kept going and going. I was sweating, we were out of breath.
By the end of it, if I had more hair, I looked like Animal from the Muppets. I was just, I was like making that noise, I think, actually.
And so finally they lit the last candle, and Father Daniel goes, "Hallelujah!" And Doug and I went, "Hallelujah!"
Oh my God.
Gloria, the tenacity of the earth and its creatures.
Kyrie eleison, the children who will go on to save what we cannot.
Baruch atah Adonai, the ordinary tenacity of plans and of people.
Om, the center of the universe.
Hallelujah, love that survives anger and winter and despair and sorrow and even death.
Hallelujah for the circle, the spiral, the web, the egg, the orbit, the center, the seed, the flower, the fruit, the opening, the death, the release, and again the seed.
Gloria, on Wisconsin. It was a resurrection of sorts, if you knew last year's game. The tenacity of the earth and its creatures. Please join us for our closing hymn, the first and last verse, Lo, the earth awakes again.